Bun găsit la emisiunea Știință și Cunoaștere. În minutele următoare veți viziona partea întâi al celui mai șocant, tulburător și îngrijorător interviu din câte am realizat vreodată. Veți afla întreaga poveste a statinelor și colesterolului și vom dezvălui cele mai cutremurătoare afaceri din istorie, în baza căreia mulți dintre noi, inclusiv eu, am fost înșelați, am fost puși sub medicație continuă, iar corporațiile farmaceutice au prosperat și încă prosperă de pe urma noastră. Aproape că sună conspirație mondială. Ei bine, emisiunea Știință și Cunoaștere vă prezintă doar fapte și idei de pe fundamente științifice solide, cu invitați de cea mai mare notorietate. Am avut până acum 2 invitați, laureați ai premiului Nobel, iar unul din ei a dezvăluit afacerea din spatele revistelor de top, ale căror profituri au devenit mai importante decât conținutul științific. Este pentru a 3-a oară în cariera mea de jurnalist când am avut ocazia să vorbesc cu un invitat de cea mai mare notorietate. În data de 17 iunie 2018 ne-am întâlnit pe Skype după luni de zile de corespondență, deoarece domnia sa nu dorea să povestească cu orice jurnalist. S-a informat despre mine, munca mea și studioul TVR Cluj. A acceptat interviul și am înregistrat aproape 100 de minute. Nu ar fi nicio noutate și nimic neobișnuit dacă aceste emisiuni vor fi atacate sau criticate de reprezentanții corporațiilor farmaceutice. Problema e aceea că invitatul emisiunii a câștigat această notorietate și experiență multiprofesională care echivalează mai mult decât un premiu Nobel. Pe nicio pagină disponibilă online nu există vreun comentariu sceptic sau împotriva sa. Nu există niciun contraargument la declarațiile sale, fapt care m-a determinat să insist cu toate eforturile de a înregistra acest interviu. Vă prezint acum o primă serie de date biografice absolut impresionante și bulversante. Dr. Paul Rosch este președintele Consiliului Institutului American pentru Stres, este profesor de medicină și psihiatrie clinică la Colegiul Medical din New York, vicepreședinte onorific al Asociației Internaționale de Management al Stresului și președinte al filialei sale americane. Și a terminat stagiul de practică medicală și rezidențiat la renumitul Spital Johns Hopkins și ulterior la Spitalul Walter Reed Army și la Institutul de Cercetare, unde a fost director al secției endocrine din cadrul Departamentului de Metabolism. El a avut o bursă la Institutul de Medicină Experimentală și Chirurgie de la Universitatea din Montreal împreună cu dr. Hans Selye, care a creat termenul stres așa cum este folosit în prezent și a fost coautor al lucrărilor doctorului Selye și dr. Flandra Dunbar, cea care a introdus termenul psihosomatic în medicina americană. Dr. Rosch a fost ales președinte al Institutului American de Stres în anul 1978 și a servit în această calitate până în 2013, când a devenit președinte al Consiliului. El a fost de asemenea președintele Societății Pavloniene în perioada 1998-1999, o organizație de cercetători internaționali de renume dedicată integrării cercetărilor de bază și clinice și a primit numeroase onoruri, printre care se numără premiul medicului de excepție al Societății Medicale de Stat din New York, premiul Anul cu o citare a Congresului, premiul Sharing și premiul pentru serviciul profesional excepțional al Asociației Americane pentru Sănătate Rurală. În 1985 a fost premiat de către dr. Michael E. de Becky, președinte al Societății Americane de Medicină Contemporană și Chirurgie, pentru contribuția la înțelegerea stresului, a stării de sănătate și a bolilor. Medalia memorială I.M. Sechenov i-a fost acordată în 1993 de către Academia Rusă de Științe Medicale din aceleași motive, precum și pentru facilitatea comunicării dintre cercetătorii stresului la Congresul Anual de Stres. Dr. Rosch a fost președinte al Societății de Medicină Internă din statul New York, președinte al Fundației Internaționale pentru Dezvoltare Biopsihosocială și Sănătate Umană, consultant expert în stres la Centrul de Control al Bolilor din Statele Unite, președinte al Asociației Diabeticilor din Westchester și președinte al Academiei de Medicină din Yonkers. Este membru în Consiliul de Administrație, membru al Universității Northwood, membru al Academiei Americane de Experți în Stres Traumatic, membru al Consiliului Științific Consultativ, membru al Fundației de Prevenire a Alzheimerului și a fost consultant al Clinicii Mensana din Maryland, consultant al Clinicii Biotonus din Elveția și al altor organizații implicate în furnizarea asistenței medicale. A ocupat funcția de profesor clinician al Departamentului de Medicină Psihiatrie la Facultatea de Medicină a Universității din Maryland și este membru activ în Comitetul Consultativ Internațional al Școlii de Psihologie și Științe Sociale, Universitatea de Flores din Buenos Aires. Dr. Rosch este membru pe viață și certificat cu înalte competențe în Colegiul American al Medicilor, este diplomat al Consiliului Național al Examinatorilor Medicali, este membru emerit al Societății Endocrine, membru emerit al Societății Bioelectromagnetice, membru al Consiliului de Epidemiologie al Asociației Americane a Inimii, certificat cu înalte competențe și membru al Societății de Medicină Comportamentală. Cine în lume mai are asemenea recunoașteri, aprecieri, titluri și premii? Este de domeniul miraculosului că o asemenea personalitate a științei a acceptat să fie prezentă în emisiunea Știință și Cunoaștere de la TVR Cluj. Dincolo de toate acestea, partea tulburătoare și terifiantă se va derula în minutele următoare. Veți afla istoria ascunsă a cele mai mari afaceri farmaceutice de după cel de-al doilea război mondial și până în prezent. Veți fi martorii unor dezvăluiri șocante în premieră națională despre tot ceea ce nu ar fi trebuit să aflați niciodată legat de colesterol, grăsimi saturate, statine și cercetări științifice măsluite. În acest interviu vă expunem monstruoasa operațiune a corporațiilor farmaceutice care durează de peste 70 de ani și se desfășoară în baza numeroaselor inadvertențe, erori și posibile înșelătorii. Cuvinte grave, nu-i așa? Trebuie să precizez că sub nicio formă această emisiune nu poate fi considerată un înlocuitor al consultului medical de specialitate, iar opiniile prezentate aparțin exclusiv invitatului și nu sunt opiniile mele sau ale televiziunii române. Ei bine, vă invit să vizionați partea întâi, după care puteți judeca și singuri. Dear Professor Rosch, welcome to our Science and Knowledge TV program in Romania on TVR Cluj for episode 1 of a very long interview.
Glad to be here.
It is an honor and an amazing opportunity to speak with you, and I appreciate the courage you have in order to step forward and speak about one of the biggest pharma business of our modern times.
Absolutely.
Dear Professor Rosch, before I start, I would like to explain to you and to our viewers what happened to me regarding the statins and why I was so motivated and persistent to interview you, and I hope that this introductory message will be seen by your colleagues who took part in making those documentary films and will eventually accept my interview proposals. Being confronted at that time with lower back pains and headaches requiring periodical medical exams, at one point in 2001 we went through a daily medication with one of the statin class drugs. This medication had nothing to do with the back pains and migraines I suffered from. The medical doctor said, and I quote, "We put you on statins." That was the sentence, "We put you on statins." Every 3 months I presented myself for updating blood tests observing the variations in the concentration of these molecules, considered the #1 public enemy of all causes of cardiac diseases. What could I know about cholesterol at that time? I have complied with medical prescription and took these tablets for 10 years in a row without feeling any improvement in my health. On the contrary, a general feeling of muscle fatigue began to feel more and more acute after the first 6 years of statin therapy. I have been presented with all sorts of explanations like heart disease does not cause pain, increased cholesterol causes it, treatment is actually prevented, but there is no guarantee that I will never have a heart disease. I was told that at that age, 35 to 37 years old, I was too young to ignore the danger and that I had to take statins.
Well, it's a story you hear very frequently, and it's just a manifestation of the fact that people are influenced by advertising and that many new drugs come out and become popular and highly marketed, not because they help patients, but because they increase profits.
By this I mean that in no way the viewers must not consider my testimony as a substitute for the specialized medical consultation, and under no circumstances they must not associate the content of this TV show with medical advice.
Absolutely.
First question. How did the notion that cholesterol caused coronary heart disease originate?
Well, the cholesterol or lipid theory proposes that patients with coronary heart disease tend to have increased atheroma, fatty deposits rich in cholesterol, on the inner surface of their coronary arteries, and these impair the flow of blood. This also favors the formation of clots that can completely block blood flow, which results in a myocardial infarction or heart attack.
When had been the cholesterol first discovered, and where is the word originated from?
Now, cholesterol was discovered in its solid form in gallstones in 1784, but was not identified in blood until 1833. The presence of cholesterol in these atheroma was first described by the celebrated pathologist Rudolf Virchow in 1856. Atherosclerosis, which comes from the Greek sclerosis and heart, is a term introduced by Felix Marchand in 1904 to describe a hardening process of these lumps, which he suggested was responsible for almost all obstructive processes in the arteries. Arteriosclerosis is an advanced stage of atherosclerosis in which the artery becomes rigid due to calcium deposits.
When exactly began the cholesterol to be taken into attention, and what were the experiments conducted at that time?
Well, nobody paid much attention to this until there were a series of mysterious deaths in a Russian battalion during the 1904 war between Russia and Japan. The only clue was that this unit had received a shipment of meat that had gone bad. The problem was investigated by Alexander Ignatowski, a professor of internal medicine at the Imperial Military Academy in St. Petersburg. He fed the tainted meat to some rabbits, and although none died, autopsy showed an increase in fatty deposits in several vessels. He thought this was consistent with the theory of Ilya Mechnikov, a Nobel Prize recipient who had previously proposed that an excess of dietary protein somehow accelerated the aging process and hardening of the arteries. So Ignatowski fed rabbits a protein-rich diet of large amounts of meat, eggs, and milks that caused lesions in arteries similar to those seen in humans, seemed to confirm Mechnikov's theory. Ignatowski published his results in 1909, and in 1910 Adolf Windaus showed that such lesions had 20 times more cholesterol than normal arterial walls.
It's easy to understand how this began, but if all these observations are valid, why is the conclusion that cholesterol can cause atherosclerosis and coronary heart disease wrong?
Well, association never proves causation. Most investigators forget or are not aware that Virchow referred to atherosclerosis as end arteritis deformans to indicate that it resulted from an inflammatory process in response to injury to the intimal lining of arteries. The cholesterol deposits came later and were the result of inflammation, not its cause. And recent research tends to confirm that atherosclerotic plaque in humans is a response to injury that produces inflammation rather than cholesterol deposition.
If that is true, then What was wrong with the research done by Ignatovsky and Anichkov?
There was nothing wrong with the research results by Ignatowski and Anichkov, who later showed he could produce the same lesions simply by feeding cholesterol. But all their experiments were done on rabbits, who are herbivorous. Rabbits don't eat meat and eggs containing cholesterol, which is a foreign substance for them that evokes an inflammatory response. And when carnivorous animals like rats and dogs were fed the same diet, no such fatty deposits could be seen. The atheroma in rabbits were primarily in the aorta and large arteries rather than coronary vessels, and differed under the microscope from atherosclerotic plaque in humans. And even though the blood levels of cholesterol were extremely high in these rabbits, cholesterol is a large inert molecule. It was difficult to understand how it could infiltrate the inner lining of a coronary artery to incite an inflammatory response. In addition, few were interested in this since coronary heart disease was not a major problem because most people didn't live long enough to have symptoms or die from it.
What is meant by bad and good cholesterol, and why has this cholesterol theory persisted if it is fallacious?
Well, few physicians or researchers in the United States knew anything about Anichkov or his hypothesis. One exception was John Goffman, who took it very seriously. He began his research on coronary heart disease after graduating from medical school in 1946 by utilizing a special flotation ultracentrifuge device that could separate lipoproteins by flotation. He demonstrated the existence of diverse low-density lipoproteins, LDL, and high-density lipoproteins, HDL, and subsequently showed that LDL was bad since it was associated with the rapid progression of atherosclerosis, and HDL was good because it had the opposite effect. As a result, high LDL and low HDL became risk factors for coronary heart disease because it was presumed that they had a causal role, which, like cholesterol, was erroneous. A statistical association does not mean there is a causal relationship. And as will be seen, LDL can be good and HDL can be bad, depending on particle size and density.
What happened after Goffman's studies?
However, Goffman's studies produced an avalanche of research in cholesterol-induced atherosclerosis in the mid-1950s that turned the relatively obscure Anichkov into a international celebrity. In 1958, Dr. William Dock, chairman of the Department of Pathology at Stanford University Medical School, wrote in an editorial, "Thus, the early work of Anichkov bears comparison with that of Harvey on the circulation and of Lavoisier on the respiratory exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide." And he compared the significance of his research to the discovery of the tubercle bacillus by Robert Koch, and everybody got on that bandwagon.
Here is another issue. Vegans versus meat eaters. Who will live longer?
Well, one of the reasons for these plaudits may have been the big boost that Anichkov received from Ansel Keys, who had attended a 1951 conference of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations held in Rome. He asked the audience about diet as it related to the recent heart attack epidemic in middle-aged men that was sweeping through the United States. Prior to the 1920s, heart disease caused less than 10% of all U.S. deaths. But by the 1950s, this had escalated to over 30%. The University of Naples professor told them There was no heart attack problem in his or nearby cities. Keyes visited Naples, where he indeed found almost no coronary heart disease in patients under the age of 60. The only exception was a small class of wealthy people who dined on meat daily. In contrast, the general population only had meat once a week or less, and mostly ate simple pasta, fruits, and vegetables. Their average cholesterols were also low, save for the upper-class meat eaters. Keyes concluded there was a direct relationship between a high-fat diet, serum cholesterol, and coronary heart disease, and has attempted to demonstrate this in other countries.
This is very interesting. Please tell us what exactly did Keyes in his studies and what were the countries very carefully selected in order to prove his theory.
His 6-country study showed a remarkable straight-line relationship between saturated fat consumption and deaths from coronary disease in 5 to 59-year-old men, and to a lesser extent in those 45 to 49, not only in Italy, but 5 other countries. It was severely criticized because of the methodology and the 6 countries he had selected. Keyes' response was that these were the only ones in which reliable data was available, and he then embarked on his large and long-term 7-country studies in healthy middle-aged men that seemed to prove his hypothesis. The U.S. had more than 7 times as many deaths as Japan. He attributed to the corresponding increase in the percent of calories from fat intake. In East Finland, where serum cholesterol averaged over 260, the number of fatal heart attacks per 1,000 men over a 10-year period was about 70. In contrast, Japan had less than 5 such deaths, which Keyes ascribed to the fact their average cholesterol was only 160. The contribution of saturated fats to the total daily caloric intake in Finnish men was over 20%, almost 10 times higher than 2.5% for Japanese men. This allegedly confirmed his theory that the risk of fatal heart attacks was proportional to the blood cholesterol level, which in turn was proportional to saturated fat intake, and was widely heralded as definitive proof of these causal links. As one leading authority triumphantly proclaimed, no other variable in the mode of life besides the fat calories in the diet is known which shows such a consistent relationship to the mortality rate from coronary or degenerative heart disease.
Okay, but what happened in other countries and why those data were not included in the first graph?
The truth is that although data from 22 countries were available, in an attempt to prove his theory, Keyes had cherry-picked only 7. The U.S., Japan, Eastern Finland, Greece, Italy, Yugoslavia, and the Netherlands. Had he included all the countries, the results would have been very different. As shown above, figures from Israel, Sweden, Germany, and France would have led to the opposite conclusion, namely, that the more saturated fat and cholesterol that was consumed, the lower the incidence of coronary heart disease deaths. So-called French paradox is a prime example. Some critics were vehement in their objections. Russell Smith, a psychologist and statistician who later reviewed over 2,000 references on the link between dietary cholesterol and health, wrote, "The word landmark has often been used to describe Ansel Keys' 7-country study, commonly cited as proof that the American diet is atherogenic. The dietary assessment methodology was highly inconsistent across cohorts and thoroughly suspect. In addition, careful examination of the death rates and associations between diet and death rates reveal a massive set of inconsistencies and contradictions. It's almost inconceivable that the 7-country study was performed with such scientific abandon. It is also dumbfounding how the NIH and AHA Alliance ignored such sloppiness in their many rave reviews of the study. In summary, the diet coronary heart disease relationship reported for the 7 countries study cannot be taken seriously by the objective and critical scientist.
Okay, so that was the missing detail which turned everything upside down. But why everybody believed the Ansel Keys study? Was he a physician or a dietary expert?
Now, Keys was not a physician nor a nutritionist. He was nevertheless featured on the cover of the January 13, 1961 issue of Time magazine and was referred to in the media as Mr. Colesterol. The tremendous publicity given to his conclusions stimulated numerous attempts to reduce coronary disease by dietary intervention. For example, the Anti-Coronary Club Project, launched in 1957, compared 2 groups of New York businessmen 49 to 59 years old. One group followed a prudent diet with corn oil and margarine instead of butter, cold cereal rather than eggs, and chicken and fish instead of beef. The control group ate eggs for breakfast and meat 3 times a day. The results a decade later revealed that the cholesterol levels of those on the prudent diet averaged 20 to 30 points lower than the control group eating eggs and meat. But there were 8 deaths from heart disease in the prudent group compared to none in the control group. In a final effort to prove his points, Keys later fed middle-aged men a very high cholesterol diet, but found that their blood cholesterol was no different than the control group who consumed half as much. 20 years later, he admitted there's no connection whatsoever between cholesterol in food and cholesterol in blood. And we've known that all along. Cholesterol in the diet doesn't matter at all unless you happen to be a chicken or a rabbit.
But didn't the renowned Framingham study conducted by independent and presumably unbiased investigators prove that Keys was correct about cholesterol? In addition, Goldstein and Brown received the Nobel Prize for confirming Goffman's contention that LDL was bad because it accelerated the progression of atherosclerosis.
Well, the Framingham study has had more of an impact on coronary heart disease research than any other epidemiological project. It was initiated by the NIH in 1950 by unbiased investigators to evaluate the high-fat diet, high cholesterol heart disease hypothesis by following 28,000 residents of Framingham, a small manufacturing town near Boston. It allegedly provided the first solid evidence that people with a high cholesterol were more likely to have a heart attack and that smoking and hypertension were also risk factors that had an additive effect. The distinguished nutritionist George Mann was involved early on to develop a survey to evaluate the effect of diet and cholesterol. An extensive analysis of his results, completed by 1960, was never published, possibly because it found that participants had widely varying cholesterols and that something explains this inter-individual variation, but it is not diet. William Cannell, director of the Framingham study during the 1950s, never referred to this, but told the press that the Framingham results essentially proved that cholesterol was a powerful predictor of coronary heart disease.
So that was another wrong direction on approaching the cholesterol problem. Please tell us what happened next.
This was contradicted by a subsequent report showing a direct association between falling cholesterol levels over the first 14 years of the study and increased mortality rates over the following 18 years. The 30-year follow-up report found that those whose cholesterol had decreased spontaneously over 30 years were at greater risk of dying from heart disease than those whose cholesterol had increased. For each 1% milligram drop in cholesterol, there was an 11% increase in coronary and total mortality. Despite the fact that the study found a fall in cholesterol was associated with increased coronary deaths, it was cited as supporting the cholesterol coronary risk. What the public read in the joint AHA-NIH 1990 publication, The Cholesterol Facts, was the results of the Framingham study indicated that a 1% reduction in cholesterol corresponds to a 2% reduction in coronary heart disease risk. The 30-year follow-up also stated the most important overall finding is the emergence of the total cholesterol as a risk factor for coronary heart disease in the elderly. No data was presented to support this erroneous inference that high cholesterol is dangerous in the elderly. And the fact is that for men above the age of 47, those with low cholesterol had mortality rates greater than those with high cholesterol. And elderly people with high HDL live longer.
Yes, but the myth continued to develop just by associating numbers and statistics. Please tell us, where is the problem in all these studies?
The problem was they assumed that just because people who had higher cholesterol tended to have correspondingly high rates of heart attacks, they assumed that high cholesterol was the culprit. However, association never proves causation. The fact that a 26-year follow-up seen on the right showed that a third of all coronary events occurred in those with cholesterols less than 200 milligrams per deciliter. Half of all heart attacks and strokes occur in patients with normal or below normal lipid levels. The real truth finally came out in a 1992 editorial by William Castelli, who had replaced Cannell as Framingham director in 1979, as follows. Most of what we know about the effects of dietary factors, particularly the saturation of fat and cholesterol on serum lipid parameters, derives from metabolic ward-type studies. Unfortunately, such studies within a cohort studied over time have been disappointing. Indeed, the findings have been contradictory. For example, in Framingham, Massachusetts, the more saturated fat one ate, the more cholesterol one ate, the more calories one ate, the lower the person's serum cholesterol. In addition, people who ate the most cholesterol and the most saturated fats weighed the least and were the most physically active. In the 1996 article, Castelli also admitted that most heart attacks occurred in people with normal or below average cholesterol. Subsequent study reported that almost 75% of heart attack victims had normal LDLs. Now, the reason this latter finding is important is that as the insignificance of cholesterol as a cause of coronary atherosclerosis became increasingly obvious, emphasis shifted to LDL as the culprit. Goffman's notion that LDL was bad cholesterol was confirmed by the statement, the more LDL in the blood, the more rapidly atherosclerosis, by Michael Brown and Joseph Goldstein, who received Nobel Prizes for discovering that cells had LDL receptors.
So finally the truth came to light, but the new enemy, called LDL, had been born. Please tell us what is LDL and why do we need it in our body?
LDL is not a form of cholesterol, but a lipoprotein that carries cholesterol to all cells in the body. As noted in the above diagram, cholesterol is a crucial component of cell membranes. It acts as an antioxidant in the brain to protect it from free radical damage, is required to make estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, adrenal cortical hormones like cortisol and aldosterone, vitamin D, and other steroids, as well as bile. The brain requires cholesterol for development and communication, and is more cholesterol than any other organ or structure, even though it must make its own, since cholesterol is too large to penetrate the blood-brain barrier, whereas cholesterol-lowering drugs can and do. It is thus not surprising that the emphasis on lowering LDL as much as possible with statins are associated with so many diverse and dangerous side effects.
And now we are about to enter into the most delicate and hot topic of our interview. Please tell us when the statins had been first discovered and how exactly.
Statins were not widely available when Brown and Goldstein made their discovery, and the vast majority of statin studies since then shows that the degree of atherosclerosis or its increase is not related to either LDL levels or their rate of change. Lowering bad cholesterol as much as possible does not prevent heart attacks in healthy people. Adding ezetimibe, which blocks absorption of cholesterol to simvastatin, resulted in a greater lowering of LDL, cholesterol, and triglycerides, and it significantly raised HDL. However, there was no further reduction in coronary events or mortality compared to simvastatin alone, and it was associated with a possible increase in cancer. Clinical trials of torcetrapib, the drug that raises HDL good cholesterol, had to be stopped because of an increase in cardiac death rates and hypertension. In addition, some individuals with very high LDL have increased atherosclerosis. One explanation for this apparent paradox is that particle size may determine whether lipoproteins are associated with good or bad effects on heart disease. Light and fluffy LDL particles actually appear to be beneficial, whereas people with a genetic defect produce large HDL particles that are harmful. So thus we now have to contend with bad LDL that is really good and good LDL that is bad, at least with respect to coronary heart disease.
When the statins had been first discovered and how exactly?
Now, statins were discovered in 1972 by Akira Endo, a Japanese biochemist working for Sunico Pharmaceutical in Tokyo. He had initially isolated a substance from the Penicillium citrinum fungus called citrinin, which lowered cholesterol. However, it was too toxic, and he extracted another from the same fungus that was much safer that he labeled compactin. Clinical trials on 8 patients with marked elevations of cholesterol were conducted in 1978, showed a 30% reduction in cholesterol, and no severe side effects were noted. In a 1979 trial on subjects with serious hypercholesterolemia at 12 hospitals. All of them found Copactin to be extremely effective as well as completely safe. Goldstein and Brown, who had learned of Endo's success, obtained some Copactin from him and verified that it lowered LDL and cholesterol. They published a joint paper with Endo outlining their findings in 1978. It was the first publication dealing with statins published outside of Japan. They also hoped to do a clinical study, but Sanico declined since their own studies in humans were progressing nicely. Much of the above and what follows is from Joseph and Joseph's book, How Statin Drugs Really Lower Cholesterol and Kill You One Cell at a Time.
Yes, but did the Japanese doctor Akiro Endo continue his studies? Please tell us what happened next.
Despite this success, Sanico canceled all their Copactin trials in 1980, since half of the dogs in one study later died of cancer. Endo was depressed since these dogs received enormous doses, 200 milligrams per kilogram for 5 years, whereas 20 milligrams per kilogram have been shown to be effective. Merck, which had signed a confidentiality agreement with Sanico in 1976, also suspended its Copactin studies and decided to pursue other statin research. They had isolated a statin in 1979, very similar in structure to Copactin, from another fungus they called mevinolin. By then, Endo, who had left Sanico, was at the University of Tokyo. We had isolated another statin from cultures of a Monoscus rubra, was later found to be identical to mevinolin, and both were named lovastatin.
Now, another name and a big profit company had just arrived to continue the studies. George Wilhelm Hermann Emanuel Merck. What happened next?
Merck had begun clinical studies on lovastatin, but also suspended these in 1980 because of the cancer problem with Copactin, since it was so closely related. In 1981, Goldstein and Brown, who are Merck consultants, showed that lovastatin caused a profound lowering of LDL in dogs as well as humans without any significant side effects, and urged the company to continue clinical trials. Merck began large-scale studies of lovastatins in patients at high risk, as well as long-term toxicity studies in dogs in 1984. The drug dramatically reduced cholesterol levels, was well tolerated, and no tumors were detected in the dogs. Merck applied for FDA approval in November 1984. This was granted 9 months later, one of the shortest approval periods at the time. The vote of the advisory committee was 13-10, and as will be seen, there were numerous conflicts of interest that violated FDA policy. The panel was chaired by a Merck consultant, and the advisory committee comprised 4 FDA employees, 8 FDA advisors, 2 of whom were Merck consultants, and 11 Merck speakers and guests. According to a transcript of the proceedings, it's very serious negative findings and comments were dismissed.
You maintain in your book that high fat consumption does not cause heart disease or premature death, and that official recommendations to restrict dietary fat, especially saturated fat, are responsible for the current epidemics of obesity and type 2 diabetes. In addition, that these recommendations not only have no scientific support, but have been promulgated by the cholesterol cartel of powerful drug companies, low-fat food fan manufacturers, and others who profit from this low cholesterol craze. Can you justify or explain these allegations?
The above is data from the World Health Organization, MONICA, Monitoring of Trends and Determinants and cardiovascular disease study that followed more than 7 million men and women aged 25 to 64 in 21 countries for over 10 years. It found no positive correlation between heart attack death rates and fat or cholesterol consumption. It was actually just the opposite. The upper graph shows the countries with the highest death rates and their saturated fat intake, and the bottom graph depicts countries with the lowest death rates and their fat consumption. All the countries with the highest cardiac death rates had the lowest saturated fat intake, and those with the lowest death rates had the highest fat consumption. The French consumed 3 times as much saturated fat compared to Azerbaijan, but had 1/8 the rate of heart disease. The heart disease rate in Finland was 3 times greater than in Switzerland, even though the Swiss ate twice as much fat. The Swiss have the highest cholesterol levels of any European country, but their heart death rate was only 1/3 that of the UK. 2 very recent studies that tracked the diet and health of more than 135,000 people aged 35 to 70 from 18 countries around the world for 7 years also found that those with a high fat intake had 23% lower death rates and 18% lower risk of stroke than those who ate the least. Very low intake of saturated fats below 3% of daily diet was associated with a higher risk of death compared to diets containing up to 13% of saturated fats.
So again, the dietary studies contradict the research data, but the companies still manufacture cholesterol drugs. Please, let's go back a little to the Framingham study.
One of the earliest studies was done by George Mann, Associate Director of the Framingham study in 1955, who left when his contrary findings that diet had little influence on cholesterol or heart attacks were suppressed. He subsequently studied the Maasai, a Kenyan cattle herding tribe, found they had low cholesterol and almost no heart disease, despite a diet consuming almost entirely of meat, blood, and milk, and whose parties sometimes consisted of eating 4 to 6 pounds of meat per person. He attributed this protection to their high rates of daily physical exercise, which may also explain why Kenyans win so many marathons. High cholesterol does not increase risk for heart attacks in people older than 65, healthy women of any age, nor in patients with diabetes or renal failure. Senior citizens with high cholesterol have significantly fewer infections and live longer than low cholesterol controls. At least half of heart attack patients do not have levels of elevated levels of cholesterol or LDL, and 2 studies found that cholesterol and LDL were lower than normal in those admitted for acute myocardial infarction. In one of these, in which patients were followed for 3 years, mortality was highest among those with the lowest cholesterols. In familial hypercholesterolemia, there is no correlation between the very high cholesterol, 1,000 milligrams or more, and LDL levels over 250, and any increased incidence or severity of coronary disease.
But this is amazing. This is astonishing. Why so many lies? Because normally we should give them credit for researching. I am not a specialist, and neither our viewers, not even our medical doctors, don't know the issue because they are just borrowing the conclusions from the official data. On your opinion, please tell us if lowering the dietary cholesterol will do any good in preventing coronary disease?
No dietary cholesterol lowering trial has ever shown a reduction in lowering coronary disease or total mortality. and as noted previously, cardiac deaths were higher in the proven study. No association between cholesterol levels and the severity or extent of atherosclerosis has ever been found in autopsy studies of the general population. No clinical or imaging study has ever found any relation between the degree of cholesterol lowering and a degree in atherosclerosis. In one angiography study in which blood cholesterol had been reduced by more than 25%, in 26 patients, atherosclerosis was increased in 18 and unchanged in 8. The Mayo Clinic study similarly found that in all patients whose cholesterol had been decreased by more than 60 milligrams, there was a significant increase in coronary atherosclerosis.
Trebuie să precizez din nou că sub nicio formă această emisiune nu poate fi considerată un înlocuitor al consultului medical de specialitate, iar opiniile prezentate aparțin exclusiv invitatului și nu sunt opiniile mele sau ale televiziunii române. Există o vorbă veche din popor: până nu te lovești cu capul de pragul de sus, nu-l vezi pe cel de jos. Spun asta pentru că mi-amintesc năucit cuvintele profesorului Rosch prezentând concluziile studiului Framingham, adică, citez, pentru fiecare procent miligram de scădere a valorii colesterolului există o creștere cu 11% a incidenței bolilor de inimă și a mortalității totale. Dar în ciuda faptului că studiul a descoperit o scădere a colesterolului asociată creșterii mortalității datorată bolilor cardiovasculare, el a fost citat ca fiind în favoarea legăturii colesterol mărit risc de infarct, dar colesterolul era scăzut, ceea ce publicul a citit în publicația comună numită Adevăruri despre colesterol a celor două instituții din anul 1990, Institutul Sângelui, Inimii și a Plămânului și Asociația Americană a Inimii, a fost că rezultatele studiului Framingham ar fi indicat că, citesc cuvintele profesorului Rosch, o reducere cu 1% a colesterolului ar corespunde cu 2% reducere a riscului de boli cardiovasculare. Îți vine să cazi în cap nu altceva, adică cum e posibil să fie măsluite rezultatele unui studiu semnate de oameni de știință obținute din contactul direct cu realitatea din orașul Framingham. Iar după această mărlănie s-a continuat cu, citez, cea mai importantă descoperire deasupra tuturor este emergența colesterolului total ca factor de risc pentru boli cardiovasculare la vârstnici. Ei bine, pentru partea a doua a mărlăniei colesterolului, statinelor și grăsimilor alimentare, vă invit data viitoare la Știință și Cunoaștere.